RFK Jr. is spoiling Kamala's post-DNC party. He's dropping out of the race for president and endorsing Donald Trump for president.
In my heart, I no longer believe that I have a realistic path to electoral victory. The chronic disease crisis was one of the primary reasons for my running for president, along with ending censorship in the Ukraine war. It's the reason I've made the heart-wrenching decision to suspend my campaign and to support President Trump. We are aligned on many key issues. In those meetings, he suggested that we join forces as a unity party.
RFK Jr. is in the same state as Donald Trump, Arizona, and the former president has been teasing that a special guest will be joining him later at a rally tonight in Phoenix. Earlier, Trump offering nothing but praise for RFK.
We just had a very nice endorsement from RFK Jr., Bobby. We're going to be going to Arizona. We'll be talking about that and a lot of other things, too. But I just want to thank everybody. And I want to thank Bobby. That was very nice. That was really very nice. That's big. He's a great guy, respected by everybody.
All right, Jesse, you know, what was most interesting about RFK's speech was how he literally took down the Democrat Party as the party of censorship, the party that did everything to, you know, negate free speech, that sued him, that fought him, that ridiculed him, that engaged in lawfare. He makes a decision, though, to drop out only in the primary states, it seems. So will that little bit help Donald Trump?
The Trump campaign's saying this helps Trump. They're saying in the 7 battlegrounds he was polling between 3% and 5%. And if those votes now go away, they say Trump gets about 60% of those compared to what Harris would have gotten. And that translates to this, Judge, and this is big. In Arizona, that would mean 41,000 additional votes towards Donald Trump. That's like a lot bigger than the margin last time.
Right.
In Georgia, almost 20,000 more votes for Donald Trump. You remember how tight these margins are. These little shifts can really play a big role. Apparently, he went to the Harris campaign and flirted with them and said, hey, you know, you want an endorsement? Because, you know, maybe I could get a cabinet position. And then she just went dark. So he went to the Trump campaign. I don't know if he's going to get a cabinet position. Knowing Trump, he may dangle something and then never give it, or give him something and, you know, Trump likes the action. That could be interesting to see RFK Jr. in a Trump administration. But Harris is saying, oh, you know, this is no big deal. That's not true. The numbers speak for themselves.
Well, you know, Katie, Harris refused to meet with him. And he said, I mean, RFK was clear, there's a lot of things that he disagrees with Donald Trump on. And so it kind of speaks to this idea that the Democrats are so full of joy and unity. And yet Harris wouldn't even meet with him. And yet Donald Trump, who's supposed to be this hater, was willing to sit down with him apparently several times where they hashed out some of the issues. Yeah. Speaks more for Donald Trump than the Democrats.
Yeah, it's a reflection of the Republican side of the political aisle willing to at least have a conversation about issues that they disagree with. Democrats just put up the stiff arm and don't want to talk about any of it. RFK Jr. shouldn't take it personally because Kamala Harris doesn't really meet with anybody. We're going to talk about that later in the show. But in terms of the numbers, Jesse's absolutely right. If you look at these swing states now, endorsements don't necessarily turn into votes. There's a lot of third-party candidates get votes from people who don't want to vote at all now because they don't agree with voting for either party, and that's fine. But in terms of swing states where elections are decided by very, very slim margins, thousands of votes, maybe tens of thousands of votes, he's looking pretty good in a lot of these states. Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin. Virginia is a really interesting one. He was taking up about 8% of the vote there. And if he gets some of those voters to go from him to Donald Trump, he could potentially win Virginia, especially since it's a very popular state in terms of who the governor is. But I think the most important thing is everybody's been trying to frame him like some kooky third-party candidate. Listen to what he actually has to say. Listen to what Nicole Shanahan, who was his vice presidential candidate, has to say about the censorship, about why they left the Democratic Party, about why is it that they were so afraid to have him even on the ballot, why they're suing to keep his name off of the ballot. That doesn't seem very democratic. You might even argue that that's how you win elections, but it's certainly not how you should operate as a party that claims to be standing up for democracy.
And, you know, Jessica, he wasn't just talking about, you know, being sued, but he talked about real censorship in a portal that was set up in the White House with the FBI, the DHS, the CIA, where all the information about him came in. Look, the fact that the Democrats wouldn't even give him Secret Service protection when his own father and uncle were assassinated. I mean, it really, he took down the Democrat Party, talked about the military-industrial complex and the wars that go on that didn't go on when Donald Trump was there.
Well, he didn't take down the Democratic Party. If the election was held today, it's a coin flip and probably advantage Harris. So we seem to be doing okay without him. And his values do not coincide with our values anymore. He's willing to betray things that were core to who he is. You knew him from Westchester, an environmental lawyer, someone who cares deeply about saving the planet from climate change, something that Donald Trump doesn't care about at all. He's someone who purports to care about a woman's right to choose. Donald Trump sent it back to the states. There are women bleeding out with,
Okay.
Oh, okay. I get.
Yeah, but that's not.
But it is. That's why
ahead.
Harris wouldn't meet with him.
Why? You know why she didn't meet with him? She doesn't talk to anybody. Who are you kidding?
I'm not kidding anyone. I'm being truthful about it. He is anti-vax, which is dangerous. And everyone.
He's not completely anti-vax.
Oh, he's just 90% anti-vax.
No, he is not.
Listen,
Were you happy you got the vaccine from COVID? I mean, really?
Yeah, I was. I had it one time.
That's great. Don't force everyone else to do what you want to do.
All right. Anyway, you said, Donald Trump's supposed to be a hater, but look at him. And, he extended an olive branch. He did it because, like Kamala Harris said, he has only ever served one client, himself. This is what he said about RFK just in April. I'd even take Biden over Jr. His views on vaccines are fake, in all caps, as is everything else about his candidacy. Let the Democrats have RFK Jr. They deserve him.
All right, well, Jessica, she called Biden a racist and then joined his ticket. People do that in politics.
Okay. I'm just saying that it is. He knows that he can have a better shot at winning by taking him on. There's nothing genuine about this. It's not because he's good-hearted.
What Donald Trump thinks. What do you think, Tyrus?
Well, the reason why she's not going to talk to him is because all he wants to talk about is policy. And we're still waiting to hear those things. I think you can have a meeting, and they've had several meetings or a couple of meetings, and they aired out their differences, how the political process used to be. Two people who see things very differently, they sit down, they find common ground, like we don't agree on this and we agree on this. Unfortunately, we don't have it. Do I think there needs to be more candidates when we make a choice? Yeah, I would love to see a 4-party system or a 3-party system. I think the reason why not only did he not want to be the deciding factor in the swing states is that he also wants to recognize that you can challenge the status quo. He had over 1 million people. He's done things, not to the level, I'd say, a Ross Perot, but he's definitely got the idea of being a third candidate in the Americans. We're all thinking about it now. So it might not serve him in terms of what he's going to do as far as being a president or that, but it is going to make a lot of people start thinking, you know what, maybe we should form our own party and things like that. So I think he's done a lot of good, and I think it was a mistake, a tactical mistake not to meet with him. Because if they would have met with him, maybe they would have came with the same thing, because you can ask Hillary about the green vote. You know what I'm saying?
Jill Stein is.
So shumming off the extra party and you lose Arizona, you'll have no one to blame but yourself. So it was a good thing Trump did what Democrats won't do, because to Judge's point, she won't talk to anybody.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.